Ah, yes, the Pontiac Fiero. So, a lot of people say that this car has so much potential, but GM held back Pontiac from unleashing this car's full potential. So, we're not going to have a long intro. We're going to jump right into the story, talk about a bit of its history, how it came to fruition, and what happened. And honestly, I think this car should have continued. But let's go ahead and hop right in and have a discussion on the Pontiac Fiero. So around the late 1970s, we were going through an energy crisis. There were gas shortages and higher fuel prices. But GM, General Motors, was having a problem too, and that was with their Pontiac brand. So the self-proclaimed excitement division, it was anything but exciting. But Bill Hoagland, he was going to change all of that. He had just become the vice president of Pontiac. And he had a ballsy plan. Okay, so this ballsy plan was to roll out a compact two-seat sports car. So soon after that, Project Pegasus was in the works. And this is the project that would eventually turn into the Pontiac Fiero. So it sounded like a great idea at first, but there were two problems Hoagland had to deal with in order to make his dream come true. So the first problem was getting GM management to like the idea enough to give it the green light, because he already knew that pitching the Fiero as a sporty coupe would make it seem as though it would compete with the Corvette pretty much. And it wouldn't be too long until the next generation C4 would be rolling out. So that was the first problem. The other problem was during the time, GM needed more fuel-efficient compact cars, not another gas-guzzling sports car. Still, Hoagland kept with his plan, and apparently he did stretch the truth a little bit, so he told a few lies here and there just to get what he wanted. So things were starting to look good, and the car that would end up becoming the Fiero was presented to the GM execs as an economical commuter car. They did not present this as a sporty model because that probably would have lessened their chances of getting it into production. General Motors did not like the idea at first. You know, they had the Corvette and they really didn't want to invest in a second two-seater sports car that might end up stealing the Corvette's thunder. The engineers told management that the two-seat setup was just a way to keep weight down and efficiency up. So their sneaky little plan worked, and they ended up tossing Hoagland $700 million for his new project. It took these engineers a little less than 6 months to create a running prototype, and the top execs went ahead and gave the new project the green light for production. So the Fiero's platform became known as the P-body in GM terminology, and this new car would use a sporty mid-engine rear-wheel drive layout. So they chose the mid-engine layout to reduce drag and weight, and to also get better gas mileage, to offer better handling, traction, and braking. But of course, the bean counter still has some say in all of this, so cost-cutting measures were implemented. The tires, brakes, and suspension components were taken from other GM platforms. Now, I'm not going to sit here and name every single car, but some of the stuff came from things like the Chevy Citation and the Pontiac Phoenix. This isn't necessarily what Pontiac had wanted, but they had to keep costs down to a minimum in order to bring this car into production. So by the time the new 1984 Fiero did come out, it was quite exciting to look at, and simply put, everybody liked it. It not only looked great, but it was friendly for people even with a limited budget. Anyone who purchased this car would be getting a very sporty and quite beautiful two-seater that looked like it came straight out of Europe. Matter of fact, when I was a kid, I recall seeing one of these for the first time, and I thought it was like a Porsche or something, some sort of expensive European car. It had its own unique insignia, so that threw me off too, and I never would have thought that it was a Pontiac. And the same can be said for most adults. At first sight, a lot of people did not know this was a Pontiac. I mean, unless that person knew about cars or saw a magazine ad or TV commercial, or even word of mouth. Remember, nobody had smartphones back in 1984, so a lot of things were by word of mouth back then. So other than its good looks, it also had an attractive price. You could get one of these for a base price of less than $8 grand. So the automotive media, Motor Trend, Car and Driver, Road and Track, they praised the Fiero for its handling, but it did get some negative attention too. A lot of people were saying that it did not meet their expectations of higher performance from its mid-engine configuration. But despite the criticism, the Fiero was wildly successful. Although Pontiac operated 3 shifts at the factory during 1984, they could not keep up with the initial demand for this new car. So for the base engine in the 1984 to 1988 Fieros, power came from the notorious Iron Duke engine. So this Iron Duke, that was the 2.5 liter naturally aspirated overhead valve four-banger that cranked out, or maybe I should say wheezed out, anywhere from 92 to 98 horsepower. So again, for 1984, the only engine you could get was the Iron Duke, the 2.5 liter. Now, beginning in 1985, you could get a 2.8 liter V6, which cranked out a more powerful 140 horsepower and produced 160 pound-feet of torque. The exterior featured innovative body panels, and these were durable plastic panels that were dent resistant. And on the inside, I actually saw the inside of a Fiero back in the day, and it looked very modern, very contemporary. At first glance, you would think it was worthy of a much higher price tag. So as far as improvements, Pontiac's only option was to improve the Fiero over a period of time. So this is another reason they had to wait until 1985 before offering the V6 engine. At first, the Fiero was standard with a 4-speed stick shift and optional with a 3-speed automatic. The 4-speed manual was a bit outdated, but it wouldn't be replaced with a more modern 5-speed manual until the middle of the 1986 model year. The cars with the Iron Duke were painfully slow. Let me say this, they took about a little over 11 seconds to get from 0 to 60. But with the 5-speed and V6 combination, the Fiero could get 0 to 60 in the mid 7 seconds, and that was pretty much on par with the Toyota MR2, its chief rival at the time. The steering effort was higher than other small cars, and Pontiac had planned to give the Fiero a power assist steering system as a mid-year 1988 option, but unfortunately the Fiero got dropped. Okay, it got canceled before that could happen. If Pontiac did have it their way though, there would have been an all-aluminum turbocharged 2.9 liter V6, cranking out a solid 220 horsepower. But again, things didn't go as planned, and this did not happen either. The biggest problem was when it was discovered its 4-cylinder engine was prone to catch fire. It was reported that this was because of engine connecting rod failure due to running the engine at extremely low engine oil levels. 1984 just so happened to be the car's first year, and unfortunately it was the 1984s that had the fires. I think it was 1 in every 400 cars catching fire. So GM waited until 1987 to recall these cars. And even though the V6 Fieros did not have these engine issues, okay, these fires, Pontiac still issued a recall and performed a fix for all V6 Fieros. Now, General Motors said it was the owner's responsibility to maintain the oil level in the car, but in reality, it was kind of their fault. Okay, it was kind of GM's fault for giving the Iron Duke an oil pan with 1 quart too low, because that's pretty much what initiated these fires. So all of this has set a bad tone in the eyes and minds of consumers. And, you know, the Fiero's reputation was kind of damaged. Well, it wasn't kind of, it was damaged by this whole fire situation. And another thing I thought was kind of funny, but people said that Fiero kind of sounds like the word fire, and that's true. And this pretty much made the whole situation even that much more worse. So after a relatively short run, the Fiero was canceled during the middle of the 1988 model year. Now, depending on who you ask, some people say this car was a failure, but I don't think it was a failure. It had great style, it was very inexpensive for what it offered, the performance had improved once the V6 was available, it had good handling, and it did very well initially, sales-wise, but soon it just wasn't selling like it was before. It made a huge splash in 1984, selling a total of 136,840 units. But by 1988, that number dropped significantly to just 26,402 units. They say those disappointing numbers were because of heavy competition. People were buying things like the Toyota MR2 and the Honda CRX. And as we discussed, this car developed a reputation for catching on fire. And although it was marketed as a commuter car, it just wasn't practical for most people. You know, as a 2-seat sports car, it was difficult for a lot of owners to live with on a day-to-day basis. Now, there were discussions about continuing the Fiero into a second generation. There was even a 1990 Fiero concept built with a much more powerful overhead cam V6. But GM just decided to cancel this car altogether, and production came to a screeching halt in August 1988. So I guess it was a spur of the moment decision, but it would have been nice if this car had continued production. So let's imagine for a second what a second or even a third generation Fiero would have been. Yes, it still would have had the mid-engine layout, but a lot more refined. And who knows, it probably would have had a turbo 4-banger or a turbo V6. But as car enthusiasts, we already know the real reason why this car didn't get the push it really needed, or why Pontiac wasn't allowed to evolve this car the way they really wanted it to. Because when they first debuted this car, they wanted this car to be a much more well-rounded sports car. So the reason is the Corvette. I mean, it's really that simple. It's almost as though GM didn't like the idea of Pontiac having something cool, and that something cool potentially evolving into a car that could handle better and even outperform the Corvette. In the 1970s, when the Fiero was in development, management was kind of hesitant. You know, the new generation Corvette was coming out for 1984, and that just so happened to be the first year for Pontiac's new car. I'm sure if Pontiac had it their way and was giving a bigger budget for development, the Fiero would have been a lot more well-rounded with more powerful engines. So yeah, if that happened, this car would have at least been neck and neck with the Corvette, or perhaps even just straight up outperformed it, not just in a straight line, but handling too. So he was given a $700 million budget. That sounds like a lot of money, but when it comes down to developing a vehicle, that was actually considered a small budget. So if he was given more money rather than the $700 million, they actually would have produced the car they wanted to produce. But like I said, they had to stretch the truth. They had to lie to the execs just to even get this car into production in the first place, because the big concern was creating a car that could possibly steal sales from the Corvette. So let's talk a little bit about trim levels. For 1984, the Fiero was available in base, sport, SC, and Indy trims. For 1985 to 1987, there was the base, sport, SC 4-cylinder version, SC 6-cylinder version, and GT. In 1987, there was also the Mirror edition, and this was a third-party installed body kit that resembled a Ferrari 308, and it was sold through select Pontiac dealers. I think I'm saying that right, Mirror. I always had a difficult time pronouncing that. Let me know if you guys own one. But anyway, this whole thing did not end so well, and it actually involved a big lawsuit, but we'll talk about that another time. So for the 1988 model year, you could get the base, Formula, GT, and Mirror. The new Formula model paired the V6 with the notchback body style rather than the fastback GT. The GT trim came out in 1985. This was pretty much the first real upgrade for the Fiero. There was an arrow nose, trim-specific wing, and extended rocker panels. These visual enhancements complemented the more powerful V6 engine that I mentioned earlier, as well as the heavier-duty, performance-oriented suspension. Pontiac went ahead and switched up the body style of the Fiero GT in 1986 to a more fastback profile with flying buttresses and quarter windows. Since it really didn't debut until mid-year, the fastback can sometimes be referred to as a 1986 and a half. 4-cylinder cars kept the notchback look, but this time around they had a new nose that got rid of the black bumper pads. So anyway, 370,168 Fieros were produced over 5 model years. And it's sad to say a lot of those Fieros have become the standard donor car for fake Ferraris and Lamborghinis, like this fake F40 you see on the screen. It's really a 1988 Fiero. Or this fake 355 that's really just an 86 Fiero under the skin. But either way, despite all of that, this car still has a strong following and a very loyal fan base. But doing the fake Ferrari kits isn't the only way people mod this car. The Fiero prototype was designed to accommodate a V8, so the engine bay is big enough for you to drop a small block V8 right in. Now, I'm not going to name every possible engine swap, but some of the most common ones are, if you can believe this, the Northstar V8 from Cadillac. I'm not sure if it's the earlier ones or the later ones that they actually fixed the head bolt issue, but people swap the Northstar V8s into these Fieros. People also dropped LS1s in there, the same LS1 that powered the C5 Corvette and the F-body Camaro and Firebirds. Hell, I mean, people even swap in the 3800, whether that's the L36 or the L67 that was used in so many GM cars over time. Those fit rather nicely into the Fiero with minimal modifications. But there's a bunch of different companies out there that specifically sell aftermarket V8 swap kits for the Fiero just to simplify the process. If Pontiac could be brought back as its own entity and without any GM influence, I want to see the Grand Prix, the Firebird, and the Fiero make a comeback. Because I think if done correctly, like for example, Toyota's talking about bringing back the MR2. So I think a resurrected Fiero would give it some stiff competition. Now I said without GM influence because I think if GM had it their way, Pontiac would be nothing but crossovers just like Buick. If they brought the Grand Prix back, they could do it kind of like how they did with the Hellcat. Just a very powerful sedan that people love. People want cars like that. And all these Hellcats prove that. If there was a Grand Prix that could do that, I think it would sell in droves. And like I said, a small sports car, of course, a mid-engine layout, just like the MR2 that they're talking about bringing back. And of course the Firebird. The Firebird just cause, it could be a modern Mustang competitor, something like that. But yeah, those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think. Do you own a Fiero? Do you have the Iron Duke or do you have the V6? Did you experience any of those fire issues? How do you like the car? What do you think about it? Would you like to see it return possibly? All right, so thanks for watching and I'll catch you guys on the next one.